ever gives up. He's always there, fighting for freedom over land and air. G.I. Joe!
Hello everybody, Mac here. Welcome back to the show. What we have today is the highly anticipated Cobra Tele-Viper and Cobra Flight Pod, aka the Trouble Bubble 2-pack. This vehicle pack, I believe, is just a Hasbro Pulse exclusive, I think. I don't know if at the time of this recording if they're sold out. I know the pre-orders sold out. I haven't checked Hasbro Pulse in a while to see if this is sold out entirely. I can't imagine that it is. I will put a link to the page down below, because even if it is sold out now, I'm willing to bet they will restock this during PulseCon, because I know we're going to see probably a restock of Chuckles during PulseCon. Hopefully, we'll also see a restocking of Eels during PulseCon. But today, we are going to be taking a look at this. And this is a very long box, as you can see. And we have some great artwork. This is actually the toy itself, the Trouble Bubble and the Tele-Viper. In the background, you have even smaller versions of that with the flight pods coming up out of the rainforest. And over here, we have a very nice artist's rendition of the Tele-Viper, along with a look at some of the accessories that you get with it. This image is really nice. I really like this. I really like how they used the toy and the figure itself to display on there, rather than just like an artist's rendition of how we get sometimes with the windowless packaging. On the bottom, we have the Cobra logo. Up top, G.I.Joe Classified Series. On the side, we have the barcode, 79 in the line. Over here, we have a larger image of that Tele-Viper that we had up front. And on the back here, we have some really nice glamour shots, or not glamour shots, but we have some really nice promotional shots showing the height of the Tele-Viper, the height of the flight pod, all of the accessories you get with it, the aerial mine, the missiles, the Tele-Viper's pack. We have some close-ups over here, and this is just a really nice display, and I think this along the bottom is their version of the file card. They've been getting smaller and smaller as time goes by, because I think less and less people are really worried about it. On the bottom, just the barcode. So, without further ado, let's just get this packaging open, and let's take a look at the G.I.Joe Classified Series, Hasbro, Cobra Tele-Viper, and Cobra Flight Pod. Here is our Tele-Viper out of the box, and putting the tape measure to him, we can see that he is just shy of 6.5 inches to the top of his helmet. So before we get started, there's a few things worth mentioning about the Tele-Viper. Historically speaking, I think this is actually the first Viper that was ever released in the vintage line. I remember the Tele-Viper coming out, and I think it was the next year, or maybe the next year and a half later, that the actual Viper came out, and everything just started having Viper at the end of it. But I remember the Tele-Viper coming out, I think it might have been the second wave of Cobra figures when they were looking for specialists, and they came up with the Tele-Viper as their communications specialist. Also, I never had the Tele-Viper when I was a kid, believe it or not, so I don't really have anything to compare this to. I can just go by what I have in my hand right now. Also, I think this is a really decent head sculpt. I usually don't go for the expression, but for some reason, I kind of like the sneer on his face. I think he might have had that in the vintage line. I'm not entirely sure. But if we take a look at him, not only do I like this face sculpt and this sneer, I kind of like how the visor it's not whited out. It's very silver and reflective and metallic. I really like that. The helmet has always had a unique look to it. I like that as well. But we have like this purple vest right here, the purple utility pouches, and then we have sort of like almost a purple spat to his boots down here that gives a very nice accent to this black and this Cobra blue that he has going on. I really like this. And over here, you can see this was one of the things that was featured on the back of the packaging, is this little wrist display right here. It's not quite as bright as it looks on the side of the packaging, but it still does stand out, and it still looks good, and I still like it. It's just like one more thing to just add to him. He has these side pouches here that I think are really nice, and of course he has the traditional Cobra logo right there on his shoulder. Now, if I have one complaint about it, it is that he can't really have his arms down in a neutral pose very well. And I don't know if that is just because of how he has his sleeves bunched up right here. Oh, by the way, on the vintage figure, I do believe that this was just flesh tone, that he didn't have like a black undersuit. This was just all flesh tone and he wasn't wearing gloves. But you'll see why they didn't do that with this figure in a moment when we start looking at the accessories that came with him. And also you can see right here, just that fitted, like that shirt collar popping up out from underneath the vest, which I thought, even though I didn't have this figure, even as a kid, I thought that was very unique for the Cobra figures, just to have sort of like that button-down collared shirt underneath his vest right there. Now, taking a look at the articulation, his head will do a complete 360. He has some pretty decent tilt from side to side. He can look up fairly well, he can really look down, and if you pop the head off, you can see not only is there a dumbbell joint right there, but the neck itself is also hinged where it connects to the torso. So we just pop that back on. Arms will do a complete 360. He has a very nice butterfly hinge right there. Arms will come up past 90. Bicep swivel. Double jointed elbows with some really good travel. Hinges will spin. Wrists will spin. Wrists hinge in and out. And on this one, they hinge in and out as well. Both of them hinge in and out. And I know normally we like to have the weapon-wielding hands going up and down, even though he doesn't really have a weapon, but I think they probably hinge in and out to make it easier to grab onto the controls of the flight pod. Now, he does have a ball joint that will do a complete 360. The ball joint will rock back. The ball joint will rock forward. Give him some rock side to side. He does have a hinge right here, but when he doesn't get as much... Oh, wait, yes, he does. I thought the vest was going to hold him up, but he does get back very well, and he does come forward very well. And I think that is twofold. One, the vest is a light plastic, that there is more bend to it than there has been in some of the other classified figures, but also it's not completely tight, that it will ride up and down on him, so that when you hinge him forward, the vest will come up a little bit, giving him more mobility than your typical figure that has a vest like that. Drop down legs. That'll kick out to the side. Legs will go forward. Legs will go back. Thigh cut. Tight double jointed knees with some decent travel to them. Boot cut. Ankles rock back. Ankles rock forward. And we have a forward-facing pin for some rocker. Taking a quick look at his belt right here, he has some accessories hanging off of it, that he does have these two purple pouches on either side. And also he has right here what looks to be like maybe a smartphone or a satellite phone attached to the belt. But the belt is a molded piece that floats separately from the figure. As a matter of fact, you can see the crotch piece belt underneath. But if you try and bring it down to cover that, you kind of expose the ball joint at the waist. If you let it ride up a little bit, it is loose, and if you let it ride up, it does a real good job of covering up the ball joint, covering up the torso, making it look like a complete uniform. Now, just like we get with all the classified figures right now, we get a weapons crate with the accessories for the Tele-Viper and the Cobra Flight Pod. This is a bigger box than we have for just the regular figures, but cracking it open, we can see all the bags inside. Some are for the Tele-Viper, some are for the Flight Pod, so we're going to rip into these and find out which is which. So now that we've got everything separated, the first thing we're going to take a look at is the Tele-Viper's accessory pack, and this is his backpack. And I wish I could say how much it looks like the vintage line, but I can't, because as I said, I don't have the vintage figure, but we can at least appreciate this for what it is. I really like this control panel up here at the top of the pack, how it has its antenna right here, which I'm guessing is like a satellite uplink antenna. We also have the peg at the back so that it can peg into the back of the Tele-Viper, but we also have this little nub down here, this little tab, and that hooks up to this utility line. It plugs in just like that, and then the other end plugs into the Tele-Vipers. I forget what these are called. I just call them a big ear, that it looks like it's just a big listening device, so that you can point it at something and hear what people are talking about. I thought with the original Tele-Viper, this was some sort of camera that was meant to like broadcast like battlefield imagery back to the Terrordrome or back to Cobra headquarters. This time around, it's a big listening device. Maybe it was always a listening device. I just always thought that the original was a camera of some kind. Now, we can take this and we can just pop this right into the back of our Viper, of our Tele-Viper, and that fits real well. Very snug. Oh, let's adjust that. Very snug. Color motif goes very well with the figure. And then we have this guy that we just pop right into his hand. Oh. There we go. Let's try this without that first. There we go. That's easier. Put it in his hand first, and then hook up the connector. Hook up the cable. And there we go. He has his big ear. Like I said, I thought it was a camera all those years. Now I know better. Or they just changed it. The only other accessories that we have for the Viper itself, for the Tele-Viper himself, are these two additional head sculpts. The one that he comes with out of the package has a light skin tone. We have one with a darker skin tone that I think, let's hold this up here, I think it's basically the same sculpt. No, they are different sculpts because that sneer is mirroring each other. So it's a different sculpt and a different skin tone. And we saw how easily the head pops off. And then we can pop this on. That didn't pop very well. Pops off nice. And then it goes right on him. And there we go. We have a different character. So that if you are army building these, like I am, I actually bought 2 of these, you can have 2 different Tele-Vipers. And that is why they gave him the long sleeves and like sort of like the undergarment to cover up his arms so that you don't have to worry about the skin tone of the arms. You can swap whatever head you want on there. But we have one more head sculpt for it as well, which is kind of my favorite, which is a fully enclosed, looks like he's in a VR headset. And I think that is pretty cool. Then we pop that on. Oop. There we go. We pop that on. And now I just feel like he's like spy extraordinaire. Like this is somehow picking up things from long distance, like these are electro binoculars or something, and then he has his listening device, and I don't know, this might be my favorite, that I think one of my Vipers is going to have that head, and then the other Viper will have one of these. We'll have to wait and see, but I really like the look of that. After taking a better look at this enclosed head sculpt, I wanted to take a better look at it with you, because the more I look at this, the more I really like this. And the more I feel like this is designed specifically for the flight pod, sort of like making the Tele-Viper a flight pod pilot. Because not only is the front enclosed like this, but you can see that the back of the helmet is different as well, that it sort of has like little sensor nodes or something. Like maybe this was designed to work specifically with the flight pod. Like this little VR headset right here syncs up with the HUD that we have in place on the front of the Trouble Bubble. That's a really cool idea. And it sort of links the Tele-Viper more to the flight pod rather than just being the figure that he comes with. Like this sort of gives the Tele-Viper reason for having the flight pod, that he can link up with it directly. I think that's really cool. And now we're going to take a look at what I feel like everybody has been waiting for, the flight pod itself, the trouble bubble. Now, this is the main body that you get when you cut it out of the box. And as you can see, there is some assembly required. So the first thing we're going to reach in here for is the chin gun. And look at that detail on that sculpt. That looks great. And it even has... Oh, can you put blast effects in there? Hold on, let me find some of my blast effects before we go any further. So it looks like you can, however, the barrel doesn't go very deep, so it sticks out a little bit. But you do have the ability of getting a blast effect down into that barrel. So once we have our main cannon out of the packaging, you can see that there is a... Whoops, wrong side. There is a peg hole at the top of the gun, and that connects to this ball joint right here at the bottom of the control yoke. It doesn't really pop on very well, but... Well, I shouldn't say very well, but like it doesn't like give you a good pop when you push it on, but it will seat on there very nice. And there is our main cannon for our flight pod. Now, diving in next, what do we have? Okay, we have the missiles. There's the engine pack. There's the other missile. And I find this interesting, that the dogbone launchers, the dogbone holders for the missiles are actually a separate piece as well. And you can see there are peg holes right here on the side of the flight pod, and these will just fit right in and extend right out from the sides. Maybe, I'm guessing they did that because they were worried that these would snap off in shipping and packaging. I don't know. But then once those are on, the missiles fit on as well. Dun, dun, dun. And that looks really cool. This is looking more and more like the flight pod that I know and love. So when you go, that's the one thing I was wondering about. When you go to pull the missiles off, the launchers kind of come off with them. You have to finagle it a little to get them off. But let's be honest, we're probably going to be displaying it like that. And that just looks really cool. The last thing we have is the engine pack, the thruster pack itself. And you can see there are two pegs right there. There are two peg holes right there. And that just pops right in, mounts flush, and there we go. There is our flight pod. And holy cow, does that look fantastic. We have the landing skids down here. The fins will rock side to side for flight, just like it did on the vintage line, on the vintage toy. You have these markers right here, like he's shot down 3 Sky Strikers. That made me laugh even as a kid, because I was like, this is cool, but there's no way this is taking down a Sky Striker. I'm sorry. It just isn't happening. The other thing that we have is this aerial mine. And what is ironic is I feel like this one that comes with the 6-inch classified line is actually smaller than the one that came with the 3 3/4 O-ring line back in the 80s. This was always something that interested me and made me scratch my head, that it's an aerial mine, but it doesn't really... In the original one, the mine kind of like fit into... It pegged into the seat of the flight pod, like it turned the flight pod into a flying bomb. I'm guessing they put this on there just for, I guess, just for nostalgia's sake, just because it was part of the original vintage line. I don't really know what we're supposed to do with it with this newer one. But let's set that aside for now. And let's take a look at this. That, first of all, this has a really cool heads-up display right there on the main bubble. And then when you open this up and you drop the control yoke down, you can see there's some really cool detail on the inside of the trouble bubble of the flight pod, where you have buttons, you have gauges, you have all kinds of things, little bits of detail inside. I think that looks really cool. On the control stick, we have like an air brake handle, I'm guessing. Do these turn? No. They are set differently, that you can see there's 2 handles right there. But these don't turn. They're just set at different positions. I guess to make it look like he's giving it throttle while he's flying. And then he has, this Death Star run looking targeting device right here on the main control yoke, which of course comes out through these two twin cameras right here. This 3-point harness is cool too, that this unbuckles, and then you put your classified figure in there, and you can just fit this over top of him, because unlike the vintage one, this doesn't have a back peg for the figure to snap into. You just use this 3-point harness to hold him in. So, with that all out of the way, let's actually get our Tele-Viper inside this thing and see how it looks. Oh, but first, let's put the tape measure to it. That from engine pack to tip of the barrel, it is about 8.5 inches long, and to the top of the dome, we are looking at roughly 5.5 to 5 3/4 tall. In fact, this launcher right here on the port side is so loose that it kind of keeps falling off, even as I'm just playing around with it. I may end up gluing the dog bone holders in place and then putting the missiles on. Just so you're aware. So here he is, the Tele-Viper in our flight pod, in the trouble bubble, and he looks pretty great. I'm not going to lie. I haven't put any other Cobra figures, any other classified figures in the flight pod yet, but the Tele-Viper looks really good. One thing that I wish they would have changed for the classified line, because even as a kid, when I had the trouble bubble, I thought his legs just hanging off, the pilot's legs just hanging off the side, that would start to hurt. That would start to feel really bad. I think it would have been cool if they would have somehow put like some foot pedals, maybe extending from the control yoke, that the pilot could put his feet on for the classified line. But that's just a minor nitpick, and that's not even something that maybe everybody wants. I just thought that would have been cool to do. Also, we can see that where the throttle and maybe where the brake levers, whatever you want to call them, are, that his extended trigger fingers actually wrap around those controls, which is really cool whenever you're setting him in there. I think this looks great. I really do. I loved the flight pod when I was a kid. It was one of my favorite Cobra vehicles. As a matter of fact, as soon as I got the flight pod, Cobra pretty much stopped using the Fang, because I was like, what's the point of the Fang if you have something like this? And this is just pure awesome. The only thing I wish this had, and this is just something that I wish Classified would include, and this kind of goes along with wishing that there was a file card with the figures. I wish this had the old school blueprints that you used to get with the G.I.Joe vehicles that would tell you what everything was. Stuff like that is just really cool. And you can see that whenever he's holding the controls back here, he actually pulls back on the yoke a little bit, and you have to even out the gun. The one thing that I feel this set is missing, that I wish it had, was some sort of flight stand, so that you could have easily put a peg hole down here at the bottom, or even had this piece removable and swap it out with a piece with a peg hole, that you could put like an orbital ball joint right there on a flight stand, kind of like what Hawkeye comes with his Sky Cycle over at Marvel Legends. That would have been really cool, because as it is, we just rest him on the ground whenever we're displaying the flight pod. I don't have a problem with that. I just think it would be cool if it would have had some sort of stand for it. But other than that, this looks so cool. And now for size comparison, here he is beside Hasbro G.I.Joe Classified Series, Cobra Island exclusive Cobra Trooper, and Stalker. Here he is beside McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse, John Stewart Green Lantern, and Tim Drake Robin in his red costume. Here he is beside Mattel Masterverse New Eternia He-Man and Masters of the Universe movie Skeletor. Here he is beside Jazzware Spartan Collection Master Chief and Noble Six. And finally, as always, here he is between NECA Toys, Dungeons & Dragons, Warduke, and Grim Sword. So while I get this Tele-Viper Flight Pod 2-pack may not be for everyone, I do have a feeling that this has been a very popular item ever since it was announced, and especially once it was released. I mean, admittedly, there's not much to the Tele-Viper. He's your basic communications specialist. He doesn't even come with a weapon, much like the vintage figure didn't come with a weapon, but he does have some really cool looking accessories. He has a really cool looking helmet. And I especially like that new optional helmet that's like the fully enclosed, almost like VR headset that you could imagine probably links up with the HUD on the Trouble Bubble and helps to aim the weapons, guide the vehicle, all of that. I think that new enclosed helmet is really cool. But I also appreciate the more vintage-inspired helmets with the lighter and the darker skin tones. I think that is a very nice touch as well. I also appreciate, as I found out while we were recording this video, that it's not just a repaint of the same face sculpt. They do look similar, yes, but they are two very distinct face sculpts. The real detail in this set comes when you look at the Trouble Bubble. The Flight Pod has some really great detail sculpted into it. It's very metallic looking. It has rivets in it. It has texture. It looks like it was assembled from multiple pieces of equipment. I really like that. I like the little riveted sections of the vehicle. That does make it look like this is an access panel, that's an access panel, this is a hatch to access X, Y, and Z. I really like that. I also really like the detail they put on the laser cannon that comes off the bottom of the Flight Pod, because let's face it, it's a laser cannon. I think it was even a laser cannon in the original vintage Flight Pod. I also like the details for the controls on the inside of the Trouble Bubble's canopy. The HUD across the front of the dome is a really nice touch too, something that the original didn't have. The biggest shortcoming of this set, the biggest thing that I feel is missing, and this may just be me, is a flight stand, like I mentioned before. This could have definitely used a flight stand, much like Hawkeye's Sky Cycle has a flight stand over at Marvel Legends. If we would have had that included, I think this set would have been perfect. 5 out of 5 stars. No questions asked. But the lack of a flight stand for something like the Flight Pod, it feels a little lacking, especially when you consider the bigger vehicles like the Sky Striker and the upcoming Dragonfly all have some kind of flight stand. This, you could have put something just like small in there, just to give it some lift off of the surface, off the shelf. I like the way that the figure harnesses into the canopy. It leaves a lot of room for multiple figures, multiple types and sizes of figures to be able to fit in there, because there's also plenty of headroom underneath that glass bubble. I think this is a really great addition to the collection. I think for the price, you get a lot with the figure and the Flight Pod, very much like how we got Breaker and the Ram Cycle, and it just dawned on me that both small vehicle packs have come with the communication specialists. That's really cool. Unfortunately, though, time of this recording, the Flight Pod, the Tele-Viper Flight Pod 2-pack, is sold out on Hasbro Pulse, and I do believe this is a Hasbro Pulse exclusive. However, I wouldn't give up hope just yet, because we do have PulseCon coming up next week on the 22nd. It's a one-day event this year instead of a two-day event, and I would not be surprised if they restock this for PulseCon. Hopefully, fingers crossed, along with the Eels. Until next time, my friends, play well, stay safe, stay healthy, and as always, thank you for watching.